All right, folks, welcome to Psychology, Sport, and Physical Activity. You have a treat today. You don't necessarily have to listen or see me. So I'm going to turn it over to Lauren from the University of Tennessee-Knoxville, and she's going to walk you through a lot of different ideas that are going to be pertinent to everyone that's involved in the sport management industry, irrespective of the job or occupation you want to be involved with. So Lauren, I will turn it over to you and let you take it from there.
Sure. Thank you so much, Mark. Hi, everybody. My name is Lauren Beasley. As Mark said, I'm over at the University of Tennessee now, but I graduated my undergrad from the University of Texas at Austin in American Studies. And after kind of some job searching, I decided to continue on to do my master's in social work. So my background is actually in mental health and specifically in inpatient, outpatient behavioral health. So after I graduated my master's, I got my license. So I am a licensed social worker. I'm now licensed here in the state of Tennessee. And while I was at my master's, I had a professor who I worked under who was really interested in the intersection of social work and sport. So when I say that, it's broadly mental health of athletes, social justice issues in athletics, more the case management issues. So we might, we've heard stories of college athletes being food insecure, those kind of issues. So kind of just this broad look at the athlete outside of athletics and all the other things that might be impacting the athlete. And because of that, I really got inspired and interested in that research. So I decided to do my PhD in sport management. And my research is all on mental health programming and social work programming in mostly at college athletic departments. I'm also currently finishing up a concurrent master's in sports psychology. So I definitely love kind of that line of work and that research too. So hopefully I can bring kind of all those perspectives into the conversation today. And specifically, I want to show and talk through the person and environment model. You might just see this commonly, the P.I.E model, P.I.E. And this is the foundation of the social work profession. And it's how social workers approach care of individuals. And I've been doing a lot of work to incorporate this kind of model into the sport world, whether that is sport management, sport psychology, mental health professionals working with athletes, kind of the broad spectrum of people working with other people in sport. So I want to introduce the model, talk through the model a little bit, how we can apply it, and then we'll kind of dive into some question and answer, if that sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. Are we good on seeing that? Awesome. So this is what is known as the person and environment model. And I'm going to give you a little bit background on the model first. So it grew out of what's known as ecological systems theory. And ecological systems theory was first posited by a psychologist named Bronfenbrenner, and he was a child psychologist. And he was doing individual therapy with children, and he started to notice, yes, some of these children are, anxious. Yes, some of these children may have, attention issues. However, these individual interventions I'm doing with them aren't really being effective because they're being impacted by parents. They're being impacted by their teachers. They're being impacted by their classmates and kind of impacted by educational policy that may be, leaving them behind or not giving them the resources they need. They may be being impacted by, their socioeconomic status, not being able to pay for certain resources. So because of that, he kind of shifted his work to look at what different systems impact the well-being of an individual. So he put forth 4 common systems. I'm going to kind of talk about the 3 major ones. This is kind of the modified model you might more see in kind of the sport world. And so he posited that you have an individual who may be, presenting with some type of issue, feeling depressed, feeling anxious, some of those kind of common things you might see even in performance psychology with athletes, right? That well, certainly there might be individual things that might be impacting the experience of that athlete. There's also things that are happening in the micro system, the meso system, and the macro system that are impacting the experiences of that athlete. And by the micro system, we define that as anybody that that individual or athlete may be interacting with every single day, right? So people, places they see every single day. So for example, you know, an athlete, their coaches, their teammates, right? Their parents, their loved ones, friends, significant others, right? So people that we're going to interact with every single day, and how those interactions may impact the athlete, right? So for example, how a parent talking with a coach, right, or having an argument with a coach about playing time might then indirectly impact the experience of a youth athlete, right? Even though that athlete isn't directly involved in that interaction between the parent and coach is still going to impact the athlete. So the microsystem, I think of people we interact with every single day. The meso system is one step up. So what Bronfenbrenner was talking about, the meso system, it's more of these organizations or institutions, environments that the athlete is embedded in, or the individual is embedded in. So if we're thinking college athlete, if we're working with a college athlete, while the microsystem might be coaches, teammates, athletic trainers, the meso system might be the athletic department, right? The university that the athlete is at, is it D1, D2? It might be the media, right, that might be impacting the athlete. It might be their classmates or non-athlete peers that they interact with, maybe not every day, but certainly impact the experience of the athlete. So more kind of organizations or environments. Outside of sport, we might think of that as church, right? What kind of church activities are you involved in? Or we might think of it as volunteering. What organizations do you volunteer with? Or what organizations are you already seeking help from, right? So kind of possibly not interacting every single day with, but still kind of those organizations or environments that you participate in and that impact your experience. Then the macro system, one step larger. And I think thinking about the macro system is really imperative in the world we're living in today. And I'll kind of touch on that in a second. So with the macro system, we're really looking at culture. So what culture are we embedded in? What is happening in our culture that might impact our experience? Along with culture, we think of laws, so specific laws that may be impacting our experience. So if we think college athletes, Title IX, right? Certainly a law that's going to be impacting our experience. And different NCAA policies, different NFL policies that will impact the experience of that athlete. And then going back to the culture side, right, we also can think of norms of our society, beliefs of our society. So we would put racism, sexism, ableism, all of those kind of cultural issues we deal with, social justice issues we deal with, up in this macro system, right? So we think of culture, norms, values, as well as kind of laws that might be impacting the individual. And so what kind of Bronfenbrenner was really positing, and where I think this model can really help us, is that, you know, a lot of times in psychology and sports psychology and coaching, it's very individually focused, right? So if an athlete is missing free throws, let's talk about mechanics. Let's talk about focus, distraction, right? How can we refocus the athlete? What's wrong with their form? However, in many cases, well, in some cases, it certainly can be mechanics. In other cases, it might be stuff that's happening to their microsystem, right? It could be that they just got in a really bad breakup and that's been impacting their experience. It could be kind of meso system, you know, maybe they just moved and they haven't found a new group of friends, or they haven't found a new student organization to become involved in, and that's impacting their experience. And then certainly in the macro system, especially today when we're thinking about with some of the social kind of justice issues we're wrestling with as a society, COVID, right? This huge anxiety that's happening around COVID, especially with playing careers and sports being canceled, can certainly lead to an athlete feeling distracted, right? So really what the practicality of this model is, let's look at kind of those individual things that's going on, but also let's look at what's going on across the micro, meso, macro, and how can we as a helping professional, right, whether that's a coach, an administrator, an athletic trainer, anybody working with that athlete, what can we do to intervene across the systems to help that athlete, right? And going into how this is playing out in sport right now, a lot of athletic organizations are advocating for the idea of holistic care teams or interprofessional care teams, where we bring in a bunch of different professionals to the table to work with the athlete. And the hope is that not one professional can address issues across all systems, right? So it's building a network of professionals that we can then refer the athlete to or work with for the benefit of the athlete, that can better address and intervene across systems. So I think the major takeaway from this model is that to fully understand the experience of an athlete you're working with, and therefore to most effectively work with that athlete, we need to have an understanding of things that are impacting them across all systems, not just kind of that traditional individual view that most of psychology kind of takes right now. So that's kind of an overview of the model. I know, Mark, you had some questions that maybe we can kind of dive into that'll kind of better help explain. And I'll keep it up just so we can reference it in case we need to.
Again, thank you for sharing your expertise, your time and energy on this. I think it's really interesting. And as you spoke about and alluded to, we spend a lot of time in sports talking about the importance of leadership, relationship building, and experiences. So this, to me anyway, this model seems like a really nice, succinct way to not just graphically, but for us to mentally understand and wrap our minds around the holistic nature of the social environments that we are all part of. And obviously that's going to influence whether you're talking about the athlete or whether you're talking about individuals and support programs for student athletes, et cetera. So I thought it might be kind of nice. We sort of put together a few sort of frequently asked questions in regards to this particular model. So I thought if you could just take a few minutes to really just explain, discuss, talk a little bit about how, maybe walk through an example of how this model might be really, really important for those people that plan on being heavily involved in the sport management aspect of the sport industry.
That's a really great question. I think number one, tying into what I kind of just touched on, this idea of the interprofessional care team, I think that an understanding broadly of this idea that many things impact the experience of athletes, and therefore they're going to need connections to several resources and several different types of professionals. So knowing this model, being able to communicate this model when you step out into the professional world can really be an asset in advocating for the hiring or developing of holistic programming in sport. Outside of kind of just that, another way this model can be used, I think is super applicable to sport management specifically, is your kind of individual in the center here doesn't necessarily need to be like one athlete. So a lot of times, I know in some of I teach RSM 410, which is intercollegiate athletics. And we do a lot of, kind of case studies on like, should this athletic department move from FCS to FBS, right? Those kind of transitions in conferences. And we use this model to answer that question. So we, in that case, our athlete here, the client in the middle, would be the athletic department. And then you can still kind of use the similar micro, meso, macro systems to identify key stakeholders and key issues you might encounter in making that decision. So for example, if we have, an FCS athletic department in the middle here, the micro system of that athletic department, who that athletic department interacts with on a day-to-day basis, right? So we might say other departments across campus, academic departments, the president, right? Faculty, student athletes, coaches, athletic trainers, employees, so all those different stakeholders in the microsystem. Then we might take it a step out to the meso. What conference are we in now versus what conference are we thinking about joining, right? The NCAA, what impact does the NCAA have on that decision? What are their laws and compliance issues? So kind of those, still even a step back, kind of that broader perspective. And then in the macro system, right, we might want to think of the culture of the area we live in, right? What part, if we're in the South, right, there's possibly more fan base for college football compared to some other areas of the country. So if we're in the South versus in the West, right, there might be other cultural considerations to take in place. Thinking about kind of the broader federal regulations that might impact that decision, Title IX certainly has to be taken into account when we're moving conferences. So I think from a very management perspective, we can use this model to still identify stakeholders and identify certain issues and considerations we need to take into consideration when we're making those kind of managerial decisions.
That's wonderful. I think, a lot of time we in the management world, especially within sport, we kind of lose sight sometimes of the forest because of the trees. And we, as we're making decisions, we talk a lot about in leadership, let's make strong decisions, let's make ethical based decisions. And this obviously seems like a model that can really help with that process because you truly understand the impact at all these different levels.
Mm-hmm.
If you could just maybe address the same idea, but walk through it for those students that really want to be involved in coaching. Maybe talk about how this model might apply to those that are heavily involved in the performance psychology aspect associated with coaching.
For sure. Yeah, I think this model is so important for coaches, and something that I'm really passionate about is like educating coaches on this model, because I think it's a great way for us working with athletes to understand that stuff is going on outside of sport. And so before I kind of get into the model, there's a lot of research kind of within sports psychology, performance psychology, and mental health of college athletes and athletes generally, that coaches have a very direct impact on either the positive or negative experience of the athletes. Probably not surprising, but I mean, the research really, they have a huge impact. And so when we're thinking about the athlete kind of in the middle here, the coach is going to certainly fall kind of in this micro system, right? The athlete is interacting with every single day. And as I kind of alluded to earlier, I think one of the issues that I have with the traditional psychology paradigm is that it's very individual focused. So if the athlete isn't performing 100% in practice, a lot of times then the response is going to be, oh, you're in the wrong, you're doing something wrong, right? So that might lead to, extra laps at the end of practice, or those kind of traditional coaching strategies we might think about. But we kind of know, if we kind of dive into self-determination theory, that a lot of times those kind of issues, that kind of negative coaching doesn't really work for a lot of athletes. It isn't a motivating factor. And so I think being able to, when you're working with an athlete as a coach, sit down even with this model and put in, after you have a conversation, your athletes very well as a coach, and thinking about what all else is going on in their lives. So, if, like we're saying, in this macro COVID that's going on right now, with a lot of the social justice issues that are going on right now, I recently had a conversation with an athlete, and he was saying, my ability on the field right now, like I'm missing and making errors that I would never make before. And he was saying, I'm just really distracted, and it's been a really hard emotional time for me with all the protests that are happening and the police shootings and kind of these social justice issues that we're dealing with. And he was, saying that I don't feel like sport is really that important right now. And because of that, I'm making these errors on the field. And he was going on to explain, like, I don't think that my coaches or my athletic trainers really understand that. And then I'm getting kind of in trouble for maybe making an error. And so I think when we're coaching, knowing what's happening in kind of this micro level with the athlete, but also being attended to what's going on at the university right now, what's going on within the athletic department, what are they involved in outside of sport that could be a strength for them, right? Whether that be student groups, church groups, those kinds of things. And then understanding as a coach that these big things that are happening in our country right now will inevitably impact the playing of that athlete. And I think when we can kind of shift our coaching focus away from this is just individually and have a broader holistic understanding of the athletes, coaches are better able to empathize and have those personal conversations. And then kind of going back to that psychology research, we know that then makes better outcomes for that athlete if the coach is tied into those kind of issues and the athlete feels comfortable that the coach understands what they're going through in that moment. And then maybe as a coach, right, if I'm seeing, kind of looking at this, maybe there's something going on in the athletic department, or maybe there's a big, rally on campus, or something's happening in that meso level, right? Possibly it's hey, we're going to shorten practice today. I know you guys are going through a lot. And even that one little change can have a huge impact on those athletes, because they hear from you that you understand what's happening in their life outside of I am an athlete, right?
That's one great points, because we talk so much about coaches being leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, now a lot of the leadership literature, research, and sort of just kind of in pop culture, the idea is empathy, emotional intelligence, some of those things that you spoke about. And for so long, sports was sort of set over here by itself. So it was about, refocusing, centering, and compartmentalizing, right? Being able to avoid all those outside distractions. And this is a nice way that, in terms of educating coaches to realize that, yes, maximizing human performance is going to say you need to compartmentalize and focus a little bit, but these are also human beings. You can't necessarily neglect all of those different levels for the sake of the performance aspect on the field, the court, the ice, et cetera. So, and now you mentioned a couple of big things, and there are two major sort of buckets, and I'll sort of let you choose whichever one you'd like to talk about. But we have the social justice initiatives when we talk about systemic racism, which is also then bringing up other issues in society, gender, xenophobia, homophobia, a lot of those different types of things. And then we have COVID-19, and we've seen a lot, just recently in your state with the Tennessee Titans in the NFL, and some of the ripple effect, all those things we're talking about. So maybe if you could just take one of those two buckets and maybe walk through an explicit example using your model in maybe one of those two major ideas that are going on right now.
Yeah, sure. I think, I think either way, we can absolutely kind of go across this model in both ideas. So I think explicitly, perhaps if we're thinking about who our client is or who's the athlete we're working with, if we're working with an African-American female basketball player at the college level, right? So that would be kind of our individual. In that micro system, again, we're going to put coaches, we're going to put peers, we're going to put teammates, family members, we're going to put significant others, right? So the people we kind of work with every single day. I'll kind of talk through who I might put on both, and then I'll kind of show how each connects to each other. In that meso level, right, we're going to put the athletic department, the conference that they're in, NCAA policies, all those types of things. Macro level is where we're going to put kind of those societal things we're going through. So culture-wise, social justice initiatives, racism, sexism, COVID-19, healthcare policies, all those types of things. And so in working with that athlete, perhaps I am a coach or I am her mental performance consultant that I'm working with, somebody like that. And I notice a decline in performance, right? I, as a professional familiar with this model, can understand, okay, there's probably I know there's a lot of stuff in this country that's going on right now. So knowing that, I can then ask those kind of questions to see what's going on. So if I had that athlete come into my office having maybe a performance issue on the court, right? I first might assess what's going on in her macro system. So how's your family been, right? What kind of social support are you getting? What's going on with your friends? So first kind of assessing perhaps, right, there might be something going on at home, right, that's impacting that performance. And to better then her performance, we were going to have to process through what's going on at home. Or if I'm not competent to do that, referring to somebody who can help her process what's going on at home. Then I would go ahead and kind of assess those meso level policies. So if this was perhaps back in March and the NCAA canceled all tournaments, right, and canceled sports, perhaps that's some reason she's feeling anxiety, or perhaps she's their athletic department hasn't yet made a call on whether sports are coming back, as we've seen in a lot of the West Coast conferences, which certainly can be anxiety inducing, right? So then I would kind of shift up here and talk to her about, well, what kind of, what's going on kind of broader in the athletic department? What kind of anxieties might you be having around some of these policies, those kinds of things. And then we would kind of talk about kind of these macro level issues. You know, with COVID again, right? What, besides sport, besides even just the canceling of sport, what anxieties are coming up just about COVID generally, right? We all kind of are having these anxieties about COVID, whether sport related or not. Perhaps we would get into those conversations about social justice initiatives. Perhaps we'd get into conversations about, you know, has she participated in protests? What was that experience like? How does that relate to COVID with anxieties about being in a crowd? Like those kinds of things will all kind of play into that. And then maybe there might be stuff that goes across all of them, right? So if we're talking about, okay, we understand that we're living in this era of COVID, of a lot of uncertainty, right, in our society. And maybe one of her family members recently got diagnosed with COVID-19, right? And perhaps kind of going up to this meso level, that family member doesn't have access to healthcare right now, right? Which may lead into systemic racism, right? And so knowing and understanding that even though this is presenting as a sport issue, it could very much be related to something that's happening in their family that is a direct relation to no access of healthcare, which is linked to kind of some of the systemic systemic racism we see in our legal system and in Congress and laws and that type of thing. And so I think thinking about it that way, I just think it's a more holistic view of possibly what the situation is. And then maybe then if you're referring out to a helping professional, like as a social worker, if I was working with that client, my intervention wouldn't necessarily be individual therapy or individual psychology. My intervention would be, okay, let's figure out how to get your mom into healthcare, into a good healthcare facility, right? Let's look at what free healthcare facilities are available in the area, or let's look at what kind of resources you might be eligible for that could help her get that healthcare, those kinds of things. So instead of an individual intervention in that case, it might be a meso level intervention. And then broadly, if we're thinking about macro level, then maybe it's the athletic department then advocating for healthcare in the area, for free healthcare in the area, right? So I hope that kind of helps explain how they all kind of interlink in kind of the world we're living in right now.
Yeah, I mean, wonderful job. You said something that, really kind of perks my ears up a little bit, because we've talked about this many times in class before, but referring folks to professionals. Yes. Lots of times our students, at least how they're educated here, are not going to be trained in a way that they can, while their heart might be in a good place and want to help, they may not be necessarily trained in a way to maximize that benefit to truly help that person or that community. So that's always something to keep in the back of our mind. But also, as we kind of wrap this up, I just wanted to re-highlight the fact that you have a very unique background in terms of training in sports psychology, social work, and sport management. So I just thought maybe you could just provide a little wrap up, a brief summary. If you were trying to sell students on the idea of this P.I.E model, what would be sort of your last pitch to them in terms of trying to think and apply this way of looking at the sport world?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm going to kind of fall back into, and this might be some of my own bias because this is what my research is on, but interprofessional teams. And so the practical kind of application of this model. So we saw before kind of there was this shift towards ecological systems theory and healthcare. It was very much the medical model where somebody comes in, something's going on, we treat them for that thing, and that's it, kind of hands off, right? And so with this kind of shift away from the medical model, even in like hospitals, like traditional healthcare, there was a growth of interprofessional teams. So now when you kind of go into the hospital, yes, you're treated for that physical ailment, but you also might talk to a social worker who perhaps you may have broken your arm, but when you're talking to that social worker, it comes out that you also been struggling, with unemployment, especially we think COVID, right? Again, that macro, where you've been dealing with unemployment. That social worker then can help you get connected possibly to a company for job training, job resources, or hey, here's some, this is, the resources for the food bank if you need some extra food this month, or utility assistance, right, which is out there. And so that's kind of the social. Then you might go see a trained psychologist who might help you through the mental health that you might be experiencing because of that ailment. And if we think sport, we know that when an athlete gets injured, especially a really severe injury, a lot of times there are depression, anxiety issues that present, right? So maybe I'm going to go see, like I said, a licensed psychologist who can help me through kind of the mental stuff. And then we might see possibly a certified chaplain if there's kind of some spiritual health issues that are going on. And so we see that model really present in a lot of healthcare areas right now. And sport is starting to adapt that, especially college sports. So I think kind of my big takeaway with this is if we're able to understand all these different things that this one athlete might be going through, we better know who to send that athlete to get the help that they need. So if it comes out that possibly it's a relationship issue that's happening, then maybe that referral goes to a licensed mental health professional. Or if it's food insecurity, maybe the referral goes to a social worker. If there's legal stuff going on, maybe it's a referral to a lawyer. And so I think the practicality of this kind of moving into sport is we need to have an understanding that one professional can't do it all, and a coach certainly can't do it all. And so knowing who to refer to and for what kind of issues becomes really important. And so that's kind of my spiel for the idea of interprofessional cultural competence, which is kind of a new term that's being thrown around. So as people going into sport, I think it's important to know all the different professionals that are at your disposal in exactly what they do, right? Because a social worker is different than a psychologist, that's different than a performance enhancement coach, which is different than a lawyer, different than an athletic trainer, right? And so I think as students, this is a really wonderful opportunity to begin to kind of learn about those different professions. And what kind of, when we kind of can look holistically at what's going on with the athlete, then which professional can I refer that athlete to where they're going to get the most effective and appropriate and competent care.
I think it's wonderful. I mean, we talk about professional development all the time, but it's really about educating yourself as a professional. And this is something that's going to continue through the life course of, our students' careers. And, this is something that, we know in the physical performance aspect, this is something we're very used to, right? If you're going to have a sports psychologist going to help you, focus on whatever's going on, on the field, on the court. You might have someone who's your strength coach. You might have position coaches, people that help you with your diet. So we're very used to this idea of these professional teams coming together. And I think it's great now that we're sort of expanding that from the physical performance now to really the holistic understanding, the social, the cultural, the emotional development of individuals and things like that. Sure. So I want to say thank you. What's always nice is not just to have someone speaking other than myself, but because you have such a unique background and it really highlights the evolution of our sport management industry over the past just 5-10 years. Things are changing quite a bit. And this is the plea that I would sort of make to students is that maybe it's the love of sport that brought you here. But in order to maximize and really evolve and change this institution that maybe you're very passionate about, you have to learn lots of different things. You have to keep educating yourself so that you have more tools in that toolbox so that, you can bring these to bear in the organization, whether you're working with athletes or whether you're working with, kind of a season ticket retention sales team. A lot of these ideas, it's process, not content, right? A lot of these ideas are going to be universal, and it's really about educating yourself and staying up on the latest ideas. So I greatly appreciate you taking the time because, folks, I will tell you, she's in the Eastern time zone, And so, back in Tennessee. And so she's balancing a lot of different things. She has a lot going on. So we greatly appreciate you taking the time. And she was actually kind enough so that if you have questions, I can actually pass along her professional contact information. You can reach out to her directly. If you want to talk about the P.I.E model, if you want to talk about her particular research, or maybe just want to talk about her journey and her story, she's been wonderful enough to make that available to you all. So thank you very much. And we hope to have you back again at some point, and I will stop this recording.
Sounds good. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.